Forum at 360. I'm your host, Jeremy Shea. We have three guests today: Aaron McKittrick, an adventure trekker and author of Small Feet, Big Land and A Long Trek Home, and Brentwood Higman. He's Aaron's adventure partner and husband, and filmmaker Greg Chaney, whose film Journey on the Wild Coast follows Aaron and Hig on their 4,000-mile human-powered trek from Seattle to the Aleutians. Welcome to Forum at 360.
Thanks. Good
Thank
to be
you.
here.
It's great to be here.
Aaron and Hig, why don't you guys just begin by describing how the two of you began doing these long trips?
I guess that really, kind of started because when we met in college in Minnesota, so nowhere even close to Alaska, but Hig was from Alaska, and I had, always loved hiking, and I think we combined Hig's knowledge of the Alaska backcountry with my desire to do something really big, and that's sort of how we got started.
Yeah, we actually did our first little trip together where we started thinking about this sort of thing was actually nowhere near Alaska. We were down in Mexico and ran out of buses while traveling around and kind of came up with the idea of walking off where we had hardly any map, ditched our pack in the woods and bought a few staples from a little store and kind of had our first experience wandering in the wilderness together where we don't really know what we're doing.
And eventually you two did a year-long trip walking and pack rafting and skiing from Seattle to the Aleutians. Greg, you weren't along for that trip. How did you get involved?
Well, it is kind of an interesting story in that Hig and Aaron were headed through Juneau in October, and I'd read about them, and so I contacted them and said, it's a good accomplishment that you've made it all the way to Juneau through the Inside Passage in the summertime, but you're headed out to the outer coast in the winter, and it's a really bad idea. Stop now, and then come back in the spring, and no one will think less of you, and you can continue on your journey, which of course they completely ignored and forgot about.
Yeah,
and
no recollection.
No, and then so they went off and did their trip, and I was following them the whole way, and they came back through Juneau, and I said, I'm dying to see your documentary. And they said, well, the guy that was doing it quit. And so I said, well, I'd like to give it a shot. So that's kind of the beginning of our partnership. And I went and read Aaron's journal and went through all their footage and stitched together a narrative film out of their experience.
Out of a lot of really scattered shots. He had a lot of work ahead of him.
So that was eventually making a documentary on this.
Yes.
Was part of the plan from the onset.
Well, saying part of the plan implies that we had it much more together than we did, as I'm sure Greg can tell you. What we did is we were just doing something awesome, and we just brought a video camera, and we were completely new to film. We had taken a lot of still photos over the years, and so we kind of knew a little bit more what we were doing with that, but we had this little video camera, and we thought, sure, let's take some footage, and maybe we can do something with it. We didn't have much of a plan beyond that.
I think even now, we really think more as still photographers, but it's really fun to take video, and it's neat what can come from them, especially if you have someone with the sort of energy that Greg has. But the picture's still very fuzzy. Like what should we film? How should we film it? Kind of just, yeah.
So that eventually became Journey on the Wild Coast. At the beginning of Journey on the Wild Coast, Aaron, you talk about how people assume Hig was the person, the instigator of the big trip. And we've got a clip, so let's take a look at that.
So many people seem to assume that, I guess because I'm the woman along on this trip, that I must just be along for the ride. I mean, people ask Hig while I'm standing 2 feet away how he got me to come along with him. He isn't dragging me along, and of course, actually, while we're out here, it's very much a partnership. I mean, you couldn't do this dragging somebody along. It just wouldn't work.
Okay. So you said you couldn't do this dragging someone along. You said that about 5 or 6 years ago. Hearing yourself now, after having 2 children and actually dragging them along with you on a 2-month trip on the Malaspina Glacier, what's going through your mind?
Well, you can carry somebody along. So if they're very small, you could just kind of put them on your back and go. But actually, our 4-year-old now, he walks, and no, you can't drag them along. Even if they're 4, you have to find a way that everybody is engaged in the journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just put it in context for us. What were you guys doing, and how old were your kids at the time when you were up on the Malaspina?
On Malaspina Glacier, we had Latuya was 8 months old, and when we got there, 10 months when we left, and Katmai was 2.5, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so we were out there for 2 months, and it was a trip where we were moving, but we were moving much more slowly than when we went from Seattle to the Aleutians. So we, actually had to carry both children at the time, and all their diapers, and a bunch of food, and everything else. And so we would often, just move a few miles and set up a base camp and do some hikes and then sort of keep doing that. And over the course of 2 months, we made, crossed a big chunk of ice and then made a circuit around the outside edge of the glacier.
Everyone came away from that relatively unscathed.
Yeah.
And Greg, you actually joined them for a chunk of the Malaspina Glacier trip, right?
Right, I joined him on the last week so that I could do some additional videography, because when you're actually on a trip, especially when it's getting difficult, that's the hardest time to film yourself. I mean, it's almost impossible. So what I did was I flew out and joined them when they were on the coast, and went up in towards the glacier and actually went in Ice Cave and some things like that. But I was filming them, and so they could be more, engaged in their trip, and it was quite an experience.
And this trip is the subject of your new film,
Right,
Life on
the new
Ice.
film I made is called A Life on Ice, and it's 15 minutes long, and so it's a short film. We just found out it's been accepted to the Banff Film Festival, so I don't know about the time this is airing, it should be have played at Banff.
And it was also kind of the highlight of your last book, Small Feet, Big Land.
Yeah, and there's a number of sections in that book, but the fourth section and last section is all about that journey to Malaspina Glacier and what we did and learned along the way.
Okay. So we've got a preview of Life on Ice. Let's take a look at that.
One of the things people ask us is like, why we would take our 2 little kids out here to spend 2 months of fall on the edge of a glacier.
Spruce trees generally grow straight. This one's not. This is because the ground under here is ice, and so as the ground shifts, the tree's always trying to go straight up, but straight up keeps changing. There's a bear down there by the river.
Blowing down underneath the midnight sky on fire, and I yearn and turn my eyes to all I see. Oh, north wind, how I long.
Was that pretty neat?
Okay, this makes a mother way too nervous.
Oh, north wind, how I long for you.
It seems like with Journey on the Wild Coast, the adventure itself is front and center. It's navigating rugged terrain, it's encountering bears and fighting the weather, losing gear, rationing food. With Life on Ice, it looks like that stuff's there, but there's another adventure going on in parenthood. Could you talk about some of the differences between making the two films, Greg?
Well, yeah, and actually what ended up happening is the kids start to steal the film because they're so engaging and fun, and they're actually very happy. When I was there, they're some of the most contented kids I've been around, and I think part of that is because their parents are right there. And like Erin had said at one point, she kind of wished she was back in the land of chairs, so the kids weren't just on her all the time. But I think that's part of the reason they enjoyed the experience so much, because when they're that young, being with their parents is such an important part of their lives. They're not being sent off to daycare. The parents aren't being pulled off to do work. And so actually it worked out really well. And so that became a big focus of the Life on Ice, and that made it a unique adventure. You don't see, like as Erin says, you don't see many documentaries about expeditions that are sponsored by a diaper company. It's just a different kind of a world. But it ended up working pretty well.
Okay. And did the kids, this might be for any of you, did the kids understand why Greg was there, why you were there?
I don't think, they saw him taking videos, but they see us taking pictures and videos. I think they just thought he was joining us as a friend to have fun, and in a way he was doing that too, so I think that's all.
That's true. I was joining them to have fun. It was great. It was great. I was so glad to go out. Although it was interesting, I'd never thought I would see myself taking off from Yakutat in a snowstorm to go to the Malaspina Glacier. It's not something I would normally set up, but hey, it worked out. And I wanted to give a shout out to the Glacial Erratics. They're the ones who provided the music for the Life on Ice, and they were really generous in that way.
In Small Feet, Big Land, Aaron, you write about, at one point you write about Greg prodding you guys to cross a stream barefoot. It was sort of a callback to a scene in Journey on the Wild Coast. So it just made me wonder, Greg, what sort of rules did you follow as a filmmaker while you were with Aaron and Hig and the kids?
I just had to film what they wanted because obviously they wouldn't do anything that I thought was kind of exciting. The only reason I wanted them to go across in bare feet is, and I should point to your shoes. You're wearing the same shoes now that you were wearing. We're in Malaspina Glacier in November. There is snow on the ground, and they're wearing these little trail shoes that are worn out and they're even patched. Hold it up, show them. You can see this patchwork here. They're actually sewn. So these are like wearing burlap on your feet. They have no warmth at all. And so they're walking through these streams, and I'm like, the audience doesn't know that you're not wearing like super thick neoprene under there or something. Because I talked to people that watched my other movie, and they said, until they walked across in bare feet, I had no idea how cold and wet that was. Meanwhile, I'm wearing full rubber boots, so I'm not going there. But so I was saying, take your shoes off and walk across. And they said, no, that's not authentic. We wouldn't be doing that now. So that was the end of that. There is one shot of Hig filling up the water bottles in bare feet. That's because he was too lazy to put his shoes on, and I was able to capture that. So that's authentic.
So how can we find out more about Life on Ice?
Well, it's just going to premiere at the Banff Film Festival. I'm not quite sure what the future holds for it. Hopefully, I'm making a slightly extended version. Right now, it's only 15 minutes. That's to fit more in the Banff time frame. And hopefully it'll be available for the public in the future, but I don't have any specific plans yet.
Okay. Is there a website or somewhere where someone can keep up on that?
They have an incredible website, the Ground Truth Trekking. Go ahead.
Groundtruthtrekking.org is our site, and yeah, you can find it fairly easily.
And that's a nonprofit and website, right?
Well,
Yes.
it's the website for our nonprofit, yeah.
And that has a lot of things on there, but it does also have pages for the different adventures and projects, and so you can go to Life on Ice page, and we can put something up there about the movie when it's available.
Okay. I wanted to talk more about Ground Truth Trekking because I think there's sort of a tendency to cast you two as these nature-loving, eccentric super hikers, but there's really some purpose to these adventures you guys go on besides self-fulfillment, right?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started out just hiking because it's fun, the same way a lot of people started hiking, and then we find along the way that we learn a lot of things and wanted to come back and share that. And so we set up to learn stuff, and we set up to learn stuff by what we see, by people we talk to, and then we combine that with a lot of just straightforward, regular research, finding out the facts and the numbers and everything like that, and we combine that on the website to hopefully paint a better picture of some of these issues.
And this is a website you guys run out of a yurt in Seldovia, in your home in Seldovia, right? Okay. And was Ground Truth Trekking part of the plan when you left Seattle for that long trek?
That was basically the start of that organization. I think I officially put in the paperwork to officially become a nonprofit roundabout when we walked out the door and got the notice back from the IRS while we were already there.
Our early trips were very much just like what sounds like fun, and that's kind of how we figured out what we wanted to do. But now when we're planning expeditions, planning projects, they really are those elements, the elements of trying to get out there and learn and then communicate something from that is central to what we decide to do. And so we go through a very long process kind of ruminating on what we might do. And so far, we've always been able to come together on some really interesting project at the end of all that.
And also, Ground Truth Trekking, we started it, but the concept doesn't have to be Aaron and Hig. The concept can be done by anyone. And one really interesting thing for us is sort of as we started this and we started this website, we've had other people that have other Ground Truth Trekking ideas have come to us, and we've been able to help them out and get their projects on the website too, and that's been really fun.
Okay. Do you think of what you do on these trips and with Ground Truth Trekking, not necessarily you guys yourselves, but do you think of it as science, or is it more of a storytelling?
I think of it as education. I mean, and not so much the we know what you need to know. Let's communicate that to you. But kind of sharing our experiences where we've learned a lot, and and that's one of the things that's really exciting about doing these trips. We go out there and we may think we know something, and then we collide with that in reality, essentially, and that's the ground truth idea, and it turns out to be different. And so then we really try to figure out how can we share that, and so I think of it, not in terms of science, although we do a tiny bit of that sometimes, and not really in terms of activism or advocacy either, but really in terms of education. We don't want to tell anyone what they should think, but we want to help them understand things that are difficult and interesting.
And good storytelling is part of that, because storytelling is what engages people. I mean, you could provide a long list of facts and it would be hard to get anybody, even me, to just read it if there wasn't something else going on.
You guys both have advanced degrees in the sciences. Do you think there ever would be, a scientific angle to it, or a more formalized research side to what you do?
Well, I actually do some what you'd call original science, like science, as part of ground truth trekking. And it's a small part of what we do, but there is some of that. And I've done some seismic hazards research out in Southwest Alaska that was kind of came out of what ground truth trekking was.
Okay. Is that what your doctorate's in?
Geology, yeah. And geologic hazards, tsunamis and earthquakes and stuff.
Have you entertained that idea at all?
What my actual background is in, I have a background in biology, but my graduate degree is in molecular biology, which is not really quite so amenable to getting out in the field. It's more of a lab science. And I think that one of the reasons I like what we're doing now is that I can still use that scientific training. I can use my background. I can use those analysis skills, but I don't have to be quite as specialized as I was if I was a scientist. So I like being able to look at a large variety of things.
Do you consider yourselves environmentalists, or how do you describe your position on environmental issues?
That's a semantic argument to some extent. I don't know. I don't know whether we're environmentalists, but the way we kind of think about what interests us and how we kind of focus our attention is not so much on what we would call environmental issues, but we see them as resource issues. They're about how we use resources, what the consequences of that are, and extending into the economics of it, which into kind of the benefits that come from resource development and that sort of thing.
And you talk about that. You've literally explored some of these resource development sites like the Red Dog Mine and the Pebble site. And you've also seen, like you mentioned, some of the firsthand benefits of resource development to local people. Kivalina sticks out in my memory from your book. Is that something you have peace of mind about, or is it something you still wrestle with, kind of that balance of?
Well, I think that balance is kind of what we all should be wrestling with, because it would be very easy to just say, oh, these things are good or these things are bad, but reality is messy. And that's kind of what we get when we go ground truth things. You get actual messy reality, and I think we need to take that into account when we make our decisions.
Well, I think that if you talk to people who are in support, broadly in support of industrial development, they'll say, look at jobs are what make lifestyles, and we need jobs, and so these are good. And if you talk to environmentalists who are opposed to a broad spectrum of development, they say, look, there are risks, there could be real consequences in terms of environmental disasters or environmental degradation. Well, both those things are true, and they aren't actually, they're disagreeing on should we do this project, but the environmentalists wouldn't say people shouldn't have jobs, and the supporter of industry wouldn't say we should destroy the environment. There isn't a disagreement on the basic foundation. And so, we try to focus on what are the facts and what do we know about those consequences, rather than on what should we do.
Why don't you expand a little bit on what you actually saw in Kivalina and at the Red Dog Mine, and how that fits into that?
So the Red Dog Mine is a large zinc and lead mine. It's up in the Northwest Arctic, and it's part owned by the Regional Native Corporation, NINA, up there. And then one of the things that does is they have a very strong local hire policy. So the beneficial end you see of Red Dog Mine is that so many people in those villages work in the mine, and it's a job that they can have that allows them to still live in the village. They can go off, they can do their on time in the mine, and they can come back to their village and have time to do their subsistence lifestyles and to be with their family. And people spoke really positively of that aspect of it. The other hand is Kivalina's actually sued Red Dog Mine for discharges into the river that comes down to be the water source for the village, and a lot of people also told us they didn't like that. And another thing that wasn't so much really in the conversation, but was something that struck me when I went up to have a tour of the mine, is that there's a really different scenario depending on what time scale you're thinking of. So in the near-term time scale, there's all this economic activity, there are all these jobs, and it's a facility that's filled with people and being constantly maintained. But one of the things I think is very poorly addressed in nearly all mining proposals is what happens later, because the tailings and the other waste products from that mine remain toxic forever, and therefore they need active and complex water treatment forever, which is something that when you start looking at the costs of that, it's very hard to see how that actually could be pulled off.
It seems to me unrealistic to engineer something. This would be like it's a facility to treat water. It's got pumps and filters and stuff, and then say, well, we're going to engineer this in a way that it will last forever, and I think that it's kind of it's a way of kind of avoiding an issue in the short term and just delaying it to some later date. There's ultimately going to be a point where that facility will not be operating. And so that's where I have the biggest concern with Red Dog. But I really come back to what Aaron said with the economic benefits. Not only local hire, but also a lot of the profits that are made by that are actually distributed all across the state through Native Corporation profit sharing. So it's actually a very successful case of economic activity actually filtering into the local economy.
Well, we're running short on time here, but you guys brought along some of your gear from your adventures. Why don't you start to just describe what this guy here, this red device, is?
So this is actually a Bear fence. Obviously it wouldn't look like this when it's set up, but it actually takes just a couple AA batteries, and it's got a ground and a live wire. It's not on right now. And then you wrap this around your tent, and you have to keep it from grounding out, and then if a bear hits it, it gives them a zap, and hopefully they leave. So we've been using this for the last few years, especially since we've started traveling with kids, to have a little extra barrier to.
And it's effective.
Well, I know folks have watched bears hit them. There are YouTube videos. We've so far never had a bear hit ours. But
Hig has hit ours any number of times,
yes,
either testing to see whether it's on or accidentally.
Okay, and we also have this long metal tube and this thing. Why don't you tell us what this is?
So this is a wood stove. It's actually Titanium Goat is the company that makes these, and it's just a very simple little thing. This all rolls up. It becomes, other than these two plates on the end, when it's rolled up, it'd fit inside the bottom of the chimney, and that includes the chimney. And when it's all set up in our tent, we can put in a piece of wood that's 3 inches in diameter or so, and have a nice hot fire and dry out. And it's been a really big deal for trips when the weather is very difficult. Like when we were on Malaspina Glacier and it was in the fall and there was sleet and this sort of thing. Having the ability to go into a warm, heated place to dry out and warm up was amazing. It really changed the experience we had.
And that's a relatively new addition to your...
Yeah, that's something we didn't... I think Malaspina Glacier is the first time that we used that. And since then, we've continued to use that in, fall, spring, and winter, but not in the summer.
Okay. And we've also got your pack raft up here.
Yeah, so pack rafts have really become kind of a central piece to all of our trips. Basically, the thing it allows you to walk and bushwhack and climb and all this sort of stuff you do if you're traveling on foot. And then when you get to water, you pull it out and you have a boat that can run whitewater, it can go out in the ocean, and we've done a tremendous amount in pack rafts.
Okay, that's just about all the time we've got. We've been talking with Aaron McKittrick, Hig Higman, and filmmaker Greg Cheney. Thanks for joining us on Forum at 360.
Thanks, Jeremy.